A winter drive across a frozen bridge turns into a calculated trap when a husband and his mistress believe they can abandon a pregnant woman and walk away without consequence. They think the cold will finish what they started. They have no idea that beneath the ice and silence, a witness appears, a rope drops, and survival changes everything. What follows is not just rescue, but exposure, a collapse of power, and a reckoning that moves from the edge of a frozen river straight into a courtroom. Stay with us as this story unfolds step by step, and tell us where you are listening from and what moment pulled you in. Drop a comment below. We want to hear from you. Jason Carter told Emily Carter that he needed to handle an urgent matter related to property documents in a remote area outside the city. His voice was steady, practiced, and carried the familiar tone of authority she had grown used to hearing. He said it was time-sensitive and could not wait until morning. The explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, even routine, and Emily nodded without questioning it. Jason added that the route they were taking crossed a high bridge and that it was the only road available. He emphasized that there was no alternate path, no detour, no quicker option. The bridge, he said, was unavoidable. Emily listened quietly, her hands resting over her abdomen, feeling the subtle weight and movement beneath her coat. Lena Moore accompanied them, introduced once again as a work assistant helping Jason manage documents. She sat in the passenger seat with a folder resting on her lap, occasionally glancing at her phone. Her posture was composed, professional, and distant. Nothing in her expression suggested concern or curiosity about Emily's condition. The car slowed as it reached the bridge. Tall concrete supports rose from the frozen river below, and the wind intensified as they moved higher. Ice clung to the edges of the structure, and snow swirled across the roadway in thin, sharp streaks. The river beneath was sealed in white, its surface cracked and uneven. Jason brought the car to a stop near the center of the bridge. The sudden stillness felt unnatural in the open cold. Wind pressed against the vehicle, rattling it lightly, as if testing its balance. Cold air seeped through the seams of the doors. The bridge surface was coated with a thin layer of ice that reflected the dull winter light. Everything felt exposed, suspended above the frozen water below. Jason turned to Emily and said the car seemed to be acting strangely. He suggested that she step out for a moment while he checked something. His tone was casual, almost dismissive, as if the request required no further explanation. Emily hesitated, then opened the door. The cold struck her immediately, biting through her clothing. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself and stepped onto the bridge. Her breath became visible in the air, quick and shallow. Lena exited the car as well and gestured toward a narrow trail leading down the side of the bridge. The path was barely visible, a thin break in the snow that hugged the steep embankment. Lena pointed to it without speaking, her movement precise and deliberate. Emily followed the direction of her gesture and approached the edge. She moved carefully, aware of the uneven ground beneath her boots. The slope descended sharply, coated in ice and compacted snow. She took a cautious step onto the incline. The surface shifted beneath her foot. Before she could steady herself, her footing slipped. Emily lost her balance. Her body slid forward, pulled by gravity down the frozen slope. She tried to grab onto something, anything, but there was nothing solid within reach. Snow and ice rushed past her as she slid uncontrollably. She fell hard onto the frozen riverbank below, her body striking the low rocks at the edge of the ice. The impact knocked the air from her lungs, leaving her stunned and motionless for a brief moment. Pain flared, sharp but scattered, followed immediately by an overwhelming cold. Emily lay still, forcing herself to breathe, assessing what she could feel. Her limbs responded slowly, stiff with shock, but nothing felt broken. She tried to push herself up. Her hands slipped against the ice. The embankment rose steeply above her, smooth and unforgiving. She attempted to climb, but the slope offered no traction. Each movement sent small shards of ice sliding back down toward her. Her pregnancy made every effort heavier. The added weight shifted her balance, turning each attempt into another failure. The cold numbed her fingers, and her legs trembled as she tried again and again. Above her, Jason stood at the railing of the bridge, looking down. His face was distant, unreadable. He did not call out. He did not move toward the edge. Lena stood beside him, her arms close to her body, her posture unchanged. She watched in silence, her gaze steady and untroubled. For a moment, the three of them remained where they were. Wind passed between them, carrying no words, no urgency. Jason turned away from the railing. Lena followed, walking quickly back toward the car. The door shut with a dull sound, swallowed by the wind. The engine started. Tires rolled slowly at first, then faster. The car pulled away from the bridge and disappeared into the falling snow. Emily watched from below, the realization sinking in slowly, painfully. She was alone. She called out, her voice thin and strained, but the sound vanished into the open air. No response came back. Her breathing grew rapid as the cold intensified. She pressed her hands against her stomach, focusing on the life inside her, forcing herself to remain calm. The temperature continued to drop. Her body began to shiver uncontrollably. Darkness crept in as the light faded, shadows stretching across the frozen river. The ice beneath her emitted a faint cracking sound, subtle but unmistakable. Emily moved her hands, flexing her fingers, fighting the numbness. She forced herself to stay awake, to stay aware, to stay alive. Above her, the bridge loomed in silence. The moment of abandonment had fully arrived, sealed beneath the frozen span where no escape was visible and no answer came. Emily Carter pulled her coat tighter around her body, forcing the fabric closed with stiff fingers that barely responded. The cold pressed in from every direction, seeping through layers of clothing and settling deep into her bones. She leaned forward slightly, curling inward, as if that small motion could protect the heat she had left. Each breath she took emerged as a thin, pale cloud in the air. The vapor drifted upward and disappeared almost instantly, swallowed by the freezing darkness beneath the bridge. Her breathing became louder in her own ears, uneven and shallow, as she tried to slow it down. A dull ache surfaced low in her abdomen. It was not sharp, but it was enough to make her tense. Fear followed immediately, heavier than the pain itself. She focused on the sensation, listening for any change, any sign that something was wrong. Emily placed one hand, then both, over her stomach. The familiar curve beneath her coat grounded her, reminding her that she was not alone in this cold. She pressed gently, whispering reassurances she could barely hear over the wind. She tried to stand again. Her legs protested, trembling as she shifted her weight. The steep embankment offered no mercy. As soon as her foot touched the icy surface, it slid backward, forcing her to drop back down to avoid falling. The rock beneath her boots was coated in a hard, slick layer of ice. There was no grip, no friction, nothing to push against. The incline rose above her like a wall, smooth and unreachable. Emily understood then that climbing out was not possible. The realization settled slowly, sinking into her chest with a heavy, suffocating weight. She scanned the area desperately, searching for anything that could help. She reached out with numb hands, feeling along the frozen stones and packed snow. Everything she touched was cold and unstable. There was nothing solid enough to hold her weight, nothing safe to rely on. The light beneath the bridge was weak and fading. Shadows stretched across the frozen riverbank, blurring the edges of her surroundings. The darkness made distance impossible to judge, turning the space into an uncertain void. The wind intensified, cutting across her exposed skin. It slipped through her gloves and stiffened her fingers until they ached. Her hands began to lose strength, muscles tightening against her will. Her body started to shake. At first it was subtle, barely noticeable, but the trembling grew stronger, more violent. She could not control it. Her teeth clenched together as she fought to keep still. Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. The screen glowed weakly, the battery already draining faster than it should. She checked the signal and felt a wave of frustration when it flickered and disappeared. The cold drained the battery quickly. The percentage dropped before her eyes, each number falling like a countdown she could not stop. Her fingers hovered over the screen, unsteady and slow. She typed a short message, her hands struggling to respond as she pressed the keys. The words were simple, urgent, unfinished. She sent it without knowing if it would reach anyone at all. With no other option, Emily leaned back against a low rock to shield herself from the wind. The stone was frozen solid, but it blocked the worst of the air currents. She stayed there, conserving what little strength she had. Her thoughts began to blur. The cold crept inward, dulling her senses and making it difficult to focus. She shook her head slightly, forcing herself to stay alert. Emily concentrated on her breathing, counting each inhale and exhale. The rhythm gave her something to hold on to, something steady in the chaos of the cold. In her mind, she repeated the name of her child. Over and over. She clung to it like a lifeline, letting it anchor her thoughts and keep panic at bay. Time moved differently beneath the bridge. Minutes stretched into something longer, heavier. The stillness pressed down on her, broken only by the wind and the distant creaking of ice. Darkness fully enveloped the area. The world beyond her immediate reach disappeared, leaving only shadows and sound. She felt isolated in a way she had never known before. The wind echoed off the frozen river below, creating low, hollow sounds that rose and fell unpredictably. Each noise made her tense, unsure if it meant anything or nothing at all. Emily forced her eyes to stay open. She blinked repeatedly, afraid that closing them would lead to something she could not reverse. Her vision blurred at the edges, but she fought against it. Loneliness settled over her like another layer of ice. The realization that no one knew where she was struck hard, tightening her chest and making it difficult to breathe. She thought about how easily she could disappear here, unseen and unheard. The thought terrified her, but it also sharpened her resolve. Emily placed both hands firmly over her stomach again, rubbing gently to keep warmth where she could. She focused on that small movement, repeating it again and again. The shaking grew worse. Her muscles spasmed uncontrollably, sending waves of pain through her arms and legs. Each tremor drained more energy. Her fingers began to lose feeling. The numbness crept inward, replacing pain with a frightening absence of sensation. She flexed them repeatedly, watching them move to reassure herself they still worked. Carefully, she lowered herself closer to the ground, positioning her body to avoid slipping. The cold surface pressed against her side, but it kept her from falling. Despite everything, her awareness remained. Something inside her refused to give in. Survival became her only thought, her only purpose. The night stretched on beneath the frozen bridge, silent and unyielding, with no sign of rescue, no sound of approaching help, only the cold and the waiting. Daniel Hayes drove across the bridge on his way back from duty. The road ahead narrowed by falling snow and the steady push of wind. He kept both hands on the wheel, alert to the way the tires responded beneath him. Winter had made this stretch unpredictable, and he adjusted without thinking, easing the vehicle forward with care. He slowed further as the surface beneath the headlights gleamed faintly. Ice coated the roadway in thin sheets that caught the light at the wrong angles. The bridge rose high over the frozen river, and the air felt sharper here, more exposed, as if the cold had nowhere else to go. His headlights angled downward as he crested the center span. The beams slid over the edge of the bridge and washed across the talus below, revealing uneven snow and dark stone. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly as he scanned the ground, habit guiding his attention to details others might miss. He noticed the marks almost immediately. Long, disturbed lines cut through the snow, unnatural in their direction and shape. They did not belong to the wind. They did not belong to animals. They looked like the trace of a fall. Daniel slowed to a stop. The engine idled as he stepped out into the cold. The wind struck him hard, forcing him to pull his coat collar up around his neck. Snow swirled across the bridge, stinging his face, but he ignored it as he moved closer to the railing. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind and the distant creak of ice. Then he heard it, a sound, faint, uneven, almost lost beneath the noise of the night, rose from below. Daniel froze. He tilted his head slightly, focusing on the direction of the noise. It came again, weak and strained, breaking the stillness in a way that demanded attention. He moved closer to the edge, resting one gloved hand on the cold metal railing. He leaned forward just enough to listen more carefully, letting the wind pass while he searched for the source. The sound repeated, clearer this time. A plea, barely formed. Daniel stepped closer to the railing and peered down. His eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness below the bridge. At first, he saw only shadow and snow. Then a shape emerged. A figure pressed low against the frozen ground beneath the span. His chest tightened. Daniel raised his voice and called out, keeping his tone steady, controlled. He needed to know if what he was seeing was real. He waited, listening. From below, a response came, thin and fragile, a voice struggling to carry upward through the cold. Daniel recognized the urgency immediately. He leaned farther over the railing, straining to see more clearly. The headlights from his vehicle illuminated part of the embankment, enough to reveal the outline of a person. As his eyes focused, the shape resolved into a woman. She was curled slightly inward, her movements slow and unsteady. Even from this distance, Daniel could see the way she held herself. She was pregnant. The realization hit him without delay. Training took over, pushing aside shock and hesitation. Daniel reached for his phone and called for emergency support, his voice clipped and precise as he reported the situation and location. He returned to his vehicle without wasting time. From the back, he retrieved his rescue rope, the familiar weight of it grounding him. He carried it back to the railing, moving with deliberate care. Daniel secured the rope to the bridge, looping it tightly around a solid anchor point. He pulled hard, testing the tension. The knot held. He checked it again, fingers moving automatically despite the cold biting into his gloves. Satisfied, he swung one leg over the railing and shifted his weight carefully. The talus below was steep, the snow packed unevenly against ice. He took a breath and began his descent. The rope slid through his gloved hands as he lowered himself, controlling the movement inch by inch. Snow blew into his face, blurring his vision, but he kept his focus downward. The ground beneath him shifted slightly as his boots touched the slope. Daniel moved slowly, adjusting his footing with each step. The incline offered little stability, and the ice beneath the snow made every movement risky. He kept his center of gravity low, testing each placement before committing his weight. He reached her at last. Emily Carter looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with disbelief and exhaustion. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow and uneven. The cold had settled deep into her body, and she trembled despite her effort to stay still. Daniel crouched beside her and immediately removed his coat. He draped it over her shoulders, wrapping it as securely as he could. The gesture was instinctive, protective. He spoke to her constantly, his voice calm and steady, anchoring her attention. He told her to focus on his words, to stay awake, to keep breathing. He asked her simple questions, waiting patiently for her responses. Emily tried to speak. The sound came out broken, overwhelmed by emotion and relief. Tears froze at the corners of her eyes as the reality of his presence sank in. Daniel adjusted the rope and brought it around her carefully, explaining each movement as he worked. He secured the harness around her, checking every point of contact twice. The safety of each knot mattered. He positioned himself close, one arm steadying her against the slope. He tightened his grip when her body shifted, preventing her from sliding further. Her shivering eased slightly as his body blocked some of the wind. The warmth, minimal as it was, made a difference. Daniel continued speaking, reassuring her that she was not alone, that help was coming. He told her she was doing well, that she needed to hold on just a little longer. Emily sobbed softly, the sound caught between relief and exhaustion. Daniel adjusted his stance and prepared to signal upward. His focus sharpened as he checked the rope one last time, ensuring everything was secure. Beneath the frozen bridge, with snow falling and the wind howling above, the rescue officially began. The rescue team received Daniel Hayes's emergency signal and acknowledged it immediately, but the response was slowed by the weather. Snowfall reduced visibility, and strong winds made every movement on the bridge deliberate and cautious. Minutes stretched under the pressure of cold and distance, each one carrying weight. Below the bridge, Daniel kept Emily Carter positioned carefully, holding her in a posture that minimized movement and reduced the risk of slipping. He remained close, one arm steadying her while the other monitored the rope, his attention divided but unwavering. The cold pressed hard against them, forcing him to stay alert. Daniel checked Emily's breathing repeatedly, counting each rise and fall of her chest. Her breaths were shallow, uneven, and sometimes delayed, enough to set off alarms in his mind. He adjusted his stance to block the wind where he could, offering what little shelter his body provided. Emily's eyes began to lose focus. Her head tilted slightly, and her responses slowed as the cold took hold. The signs were clear. Hypothermia was setting in, quietly but decisively. Daniel leaned closer and called her name, his voice firm but controlled. He repeated it until her eyes flickered back toward him. He kept talking, urging her to stay present, to listen, to hold on just a little longer. The rescue rope above them tightened as a sudden gust of wind pulled at it. The line strained under the force, vibrating in the cold air. Daniel braced himself, testing the tension with a practiced grip, ensuring it could bear the weight it was about to carry. From above, the rescue team approached the edge of the bridge. Their movements were coordinated but cautious, each step measured against the ice-covered surface. Headlights and portable lamps cast harsh beams down the embankment, cutting through the darkness in narrow slices. Additional rope was lowered, its weight swinging slightly in the wind. Daniel reached up and guided it into place, communicating with brief, precise gestures. There was no room for misunderstanding. He coordinated closely with the team, signaling when he was ready and when Emily was secure. Every movement had to be synchronized. A mistake here would cost time they did not have. Emily was secured fully onto the rescue stretcher. Straps were tightened carefully, one by one, until her body was supported and stabilized. Daniel checked each fastening, pulling firmly to confirm nothing would shift. The stretcher began its slow ascent up the talus. The angle was unforgiving, and the ice fought every inch. Wind gusts pushed against the load, forcing the team above to pause and readjust their footing. Daniel moved alongside, guiding the stretcher's direction to prevent it from swinging. He placed his hands where needed, nudging it away from exposed rock and steering it toward safer lines of pull. The climb was difficult. Snow blew into their faces, blinding and sharp, and the rope groaned under strain. Progress came in small increments, each one earned through effort and patience. At last, Emily reached the top of the embankment. The rescue team pulled her onto the bridge surface, immediately surrounding her with controlled urgency. She was lifted carefully and transferred without delay. An ambulance waited nearby, its engine already running. The back doors were opened, and Emily was moved inside with practiced efficiency. The warmth inside the vehicle was immediate, though her body responded slowly. Daniel climbed back onto the bridge after her, his movements stiff from cold and exertion. He followed the ambulance closely as it pulled away, keeping his eyes on it until it disappeared down the road. Inside the ambulance, medical staff began emergency care at once. They worked quietly but quickly, cutting away wet fabric and placing monitoring equipment with steady hands. Their focus was absolute. Emily was covered with thermal blankets, layers added to trap heat and slow the loss that had nearly overtaken her. Her skin was pale, her lips slightly blue, but she was breathing. Her heart rate was monitored continuously, each beat displayed and watched with close attention. The numbers mattered now, more than words. A wave of discomfort passed through her abdomen, and the attending medic exchanged a brief look with a colleague. Concern flickered, but remained controlled. They adjusted their approach, careful not to cause additional stress. The ambulance sped toward the nearest hospital, lights cutting through the storm. Every turn was calculated, every second counted. Time had become a measurable enemy. Daniel contacted law enforcement from the vehicle behind, reporting the incident clearly and concisely. He provided his location, his actions, and the condition in which he had found Emily. Police acknowledged the report and requested further details later. For now, the priority was clear. At the hospital, Emily was transferred directly into the emergency department without delay. Staff were already waiting, alerted by the incoming call. Doors opened and closed quickly as she was wheeled inside. Obstetric specialists were summoned immediately. The urgency of the situation was evident in the speed of their response. The doors to the emergency room closed. Inside, the fight to protect both mother and child began, while outside the corridor fell silent, holding its breath as time pressed forward without pause. Dr. Olivia Brooks took over Emily Carter's case the moment the gurney crossed the threshold of the emergency bay. Her movements were calm and exact, her voice steady as she issued instructions, anchoring the room with practiced authority. Emily's skin was pale, her lips tinged with blue, and the monitors told a story that demanded immediate focus. The diagnosis came quickly and without hesitation: severe hypothermia. Time mattered. Within minutes, the medical team confirmed that Emily's condition was critical. Warm air circulated around her, heated blankets were layered carefully, and IV fluids began their slow, deliberate work. Dr. Brooks watched the readings with narrowed focus, noting every fluctuation. In the first tense moments, the fetal monitor showed instability. The baby's heart rate wavered, dipping and rising in a fragile rhythm that tightened every breath in the room. Emily was placed under active warming. The heat was controlled, precise, never rushed. Tests followed in rapid sequence: blood work, scans, continuous monitoring. The room was filled with quiet urgency rather than noise, a sense that every second had weight. Dr. Brooks remained close, her attention split between Emily and the screen that traced the baby's heartbeat line by line. While treatment continued, Daniel Hayes was escorted to a nearby room. He was asked to provide a detailed statement. He spoke carefully, choosing each word with intention. He described slowing down on the bridge, the weather, the unusual marks on the snow. He explained how the tire tracks stood out against the white surface, how they did not look accidental. His voice remained steady, but the gravity of what he had seen was unmistakable. Law enforcement verified the location Daniel described. Officers confirmed the exact spot on the bridge where the vehicle had stopped. The area was cordoned off, and traffic cameras in the vicinity were flagged for review. Detective Mark Reynolds formally took over the investigation, his presence shifting the tone from response to scrutiny. Footage from traffic cameras near the bridge was retrieved and analyzed. Frame by frame, the images revealed a vehicle slowing, stopping, then remaining still longer than necessary. The data showed clearly that the car registered to Jason Carter had halted at the bridge. The timestamp matched Daniel Hayes' account precisely, leaving little room for coincidence. Further review confirmed that Lena Moore had been a passenger in the vehicle. Her presence was established through records and footage, tying her to the scene without ambiguity. Investigators examined the vehicle's location history, confirming the route taken that night. The path was singular, an isolated road, no alternate turns, no detours. Authorities confirmed that the bridge was on a single access route. There was no reasonable alternative path. The choice to stop there carried intent by default. More troubling was what followed. There was no evidence of a search, no calls logged, no attempt recorded that suggested concern for someone who had fallen. The absence spoke loudly. Back in the hospital, Emily's temperature stabilized enough for her to regain consciousness. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion giving way to awareness. Dr. Brooks remained at her side, speaking softly until Emily could focus. When asked what had happened, Emily's voice was weak but clear. She described being asked to step out of the car. She remembered the cold, the slope, the sudden loss of footing. As her strength returned in small increments, Emily confirmed what she had seen before she fell. Jason Carter and Lena Moore were standing on the bridge. They were there together. They did not follow her down. They did not call out. They did not move to help. Her words were recorded carefully, without interruption, each sentence adding weight to the growing file. Dr. Brooks completed a full assessment and delivered the medical conclusion. The pregnancy had shifted into high-risk status. The baby had survived the exposure, but the danger was far from over. A detailed medical report was prepared, documenting the hypothermia, the fetal distress, and the narrow margin by which both lives had been preserved. With the medical findings complete, investigators reached a conclusion of their own. This was not a random accident. The circumstances did not support chance. An official investigation file was opened, transforming the incident into a formal case. At the hospital's recommendation, Sarah Collins was introduced to Emily. The attorney met her in the quiet of the recovery room, her demeanor professional and composed. She listened without interruption as Emily spoke, absorbing each detail. When she accepted representation, it was done with clarity and purpose. Sarah Collins immediately began gathering documentation, medical records, police reports, camera footage, timelines. Every piece was aligned carefully, forming a clear narrative of events. As the classification was updated, the case was formally identified as deliberate abandonment. The legal framework took shape quickly. Responsibility became traceable. Decisions carried consequences. Outside the room, the atmosphere shifted as the implications settled into place. Pressure mounted, unseen but undeniable, beginning to close in on those responsible. The hospital corridor fell quiet again, monitors humming softly, the weight of what had been uncovered hanging in the air, unresolved but unmistakably present. Jason Carter learned that Emily Carter was still alive through a clipped phone call that arrived without warning. The words landed with a weight he did not acknowledge aloud, yet his face hardened as if the news had struck bone. He ended the call quickly, standing in place for a moment as the implications spread through him. Survival changed everything. What had been assumed finished was now unfinished, and that single fact forced his next move. He reached for his private legal team immediately. The call was brief and controlled, his voice low and precise. He demanded availability, discretion, and speed. No questions, no delays. The room felt suddenly smaller as he paced, measuring distance with each step, already constructing barriers where exposure might seep in. Lena Moore reacted differently. When she learned there was a witness, panic cut through her composure. Her hands trembled before she caught herself, fingers tightening into her sleeves. The word witness repeated in her thoughts with a sharpness she could not dull. She looked to Jason for instruction, for certainty, but found only calculation in his eyes. Jason ordered silence, absolute silence. He framed it as protection, as strategy, as necessity. No messages, no calls beyond what was essential. Their lives narrowed into a single directive: leave nothing that could be traced. Lena nodded too quickly, swallowing the fear rising in her throat. They began erasing themselves. Calendars were cleared, digital entries vanished. Locations that marked routine were wiped clean. Jason canceled meetings that had once defined his authority, sending terse explanations that offered nothing of substance. Lena severed contact with acquaintances who might ask questions, her phone growing quieter by the hour. They packed through the night. The sound of drawers sliding and suitcases opening carried a sense of urgency that neither named. Every object lifted felt like evidence. Every choice felt final. They spoke little, communicating through glances and short instructions, the space between them charged with tension, neither addressed. Plans formed quickly. Leaving the area became a shared objective, discussed in fragments rather than sentences. Jason mapped routes in his head, evaluating risk with each option. Lena followed, her confidence replaced by vigilance. Outside, the city remained unaware, but inside the walls, pressure mounted. A crisis meeting with the public relations team was called before dawn. Faces appeared on screens, alert and cautious. A preliminary statement was drafted, carefully neutral in tone. Winter conditions, poor visibility. An unfortunate incident. Jason approved it with minimal adjustment, insisting on restraint. The narrative had to sound inevitable. He declared it a seasonal accident, his words practiced even before they were spoken publicly. Lena assumed the role of a concerned assistant, her expression rehearsed to convey worry without guilt. Friendly outlets echoed the message, publishing one-sided accounts that softened questions and redirected focus. Attention grew nonetheless, curiosity spreading beyond their control. Sarah Collins watched the coverage closely, noting what was said and what was avoided. Detective Mark Reynolds, meanwhile, recognized the pattern forming beneath the surface. The sudden cancellations, the quiet movement, the hurried preparations suggested intent. Surveillance tightened without announcement. Authorities began tracking travel documents. Passports were flagged. Financial streams slowed as oversight increased. Jason sensed the shift immediately. Transactions took longer. Access narrowed. Control, once effortless, required effort now. Legal pressure intensified daily. Jason stepped forward with a public acknowledgement that offered little substance, his language precise but cautious. Lena's fear deepened as she imagined how easily proximity could become implication. Small disagreements surfaced between them, whispered arguments that exposed cracks in alignment. Another statement followed, rushed and less refined. In it, Jason claimed they had searched beneath the bridge. The words escaped before they were fully considered. The claim traveled quickly, recorded and dissected. Sarah Collins recognized the contradiction at once, noting how the assertion conflicted with established facts. Investigators seized on it. The statement transformed from defense into admission, a detail that suggested knowledge no innocent party should possess. What had been crafted as reassurance became a thread to pull. Inside their shared space, silence returned, heavier than before. Jason stared at nothing, calculating losses. Lena sat apart, understanding too late the cost of haste. Outside, the machinery of consequence continued to turn, unseen but unstoppable. The mistake had been made. The room held it, the air thick with realization. Nothing more needed to be said. Jason Carter decided to leave the city under cover of night. The choice came without ceremony, driven by pressure rather than confidence. Streetlights slid across the windshield as he guided the car out of familiar neighborhoods. Every turn measured, every second weighed against the growing sense that time was no longer on his side. Lena Moore sat beside him in visible distress. Her posture was rigid, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Panic surfaced in brief, uncontrolled breaths before she forced them back down. She said little, but her silence carried urgency, the kind that made the air inside the car feel thinner with each mile. They headed toward the outskirts, the city receding behind them. The road opened into darker stretches, where buildings thinned and snowbanks rose along the shoulders. Jason focused on the route, convinced distance alone could restore control. He did not look back. Unseen, police units followed from a distance. Their movements were deliberate and quiet, designed not to alarm. Vehicles rotated positions, maintaining space, while ensuring the car remained within reach. No sirens, no signals, just patience. Discrete checkpoints activated ahead. Officers moved into place with practiced efficiency, closing gaps without drawing attention. The system tightened gradually, like a net drawn in by degrees. Jason noticed the first sign when a transaction failed. His account access had been limited. He tried again, then checked another balance. The result was the same. His jaw tightened as he reached for his phone, dialing his attorney with clipped urgency. The call did not deliver reassurance. Explanations were vague. Availability was uncertain. Jason ended the conversation abruptly, anger flashing across his face before he buried it beneath control. Lena leaned forward, voice low. She suggested changing direction, taking a secondary road. Her eyes flicked to the side mirror, scanning shadows. Jason hesitated, then dismissed the idea, unwilling to alter the plan he had already committed to. Ahead, reflective markers signaled a checkpoint. A police vehicle eased into view, lights subdued but unmistakable. An officer stepped forward, raising a hand. Jason slowed, heart pounding against restraint, and brought the car to a stop when instructed. He was told to remain inside. The tone was firm but procedural. Identification was requested. Lena stared straight ahead, her expression unreadable. They were informed they would be held briefly for questioning. Temporary detention. Standard procedure. The words felt heavier than they sounded. Jason protested immediately, his voice sharp, demanding explanation. The officer repeated the instruction without engaging. Lena remained silent, shoulders tense. Her stillness contrasted with Jason's agitation, drawing attention without intention. They were escorted to a police facility nearby. The drive was short, marked by the absence of conversation. Inside the building, the atmosphere shifted to controlled quiet. Doors closed softly. Phones were taken. Time slowed. Jason's attorney was notified. Formalities followed. An initial interview began in a neutral room under steady lighting. Jason answered first, his responses quick, rehearsed, and inconsistent. Details shifted under scrutiny. Timelines bent. When Lena was questioned, her account changed. Small corrections turned into contradictions. Her voice wavered as she adjusted details, attempting alignment but failing to find it. Each revision deepened the divide between their statements. Investigators compared their words against gathered data, records, locations. The pieces did not settle. The gaps grew clearer. Daniel Hayes was brought in to confirm what he had seen. His account placed both Jason and Lena on the bridge. The confirmation arrived without drama, spoken plainly, and recorded carefully. Public statements were reviewed side by side with testimony. The claim about searching beneath the bridge resurfaced, now weighed against evidence. The inconsistency stood out, undeniable. Each contradiction was documented. Notes filled pages. The tone remained calm, but the implications sharpened. Jason and Lena were informed they would remain under supervision. Not arrested, not released, controlled. The distinction offered no comfort. Outside the building, coverage shifted. Media narratives adjusted as facts emerged. Images once neutral turned unfavorable. Commentary sharpened. Questions multiplied. Public reaction followed quickly. Responsibility became the central theme. Speculation gave way to expectation. Inside, Jason felt control slipping. His posture stiffened, his gaze unfocused. The systems he relied on no longer moved at his command. The legal threshold approached quietly. Paperwork prepared. Orders drafted. Each step brought weight. The moment passed without announcement. A line crossed, unseen but permanent. Nothing more was said. The room settled into silence, thick with consequence, as the legal turn became impossible to reverse. Jason Carter and Lena Moore were formally summoned. The notice was delivered without drama, its language precise and unavoidable. When they arrived, it was under police supervision, the presence of uniformed officers shaping every movement. The corridor they were led through was quiet, stripped of distraction, as if sound itself had been reduced to focus attention on what was about to unfold. Sarah Collins was already there, seated with calm authority as counsel for the victim. Her posture was composed, her attention fixed forward. Daniel Hayes entered soon after, present as a witness, his expression steady despite the weight of what he represented. At the center of the room, Detective Mark Reynolds prepared to lead the confrontation, arranging documents in careful order. Jason maintained a cold demeanor. His face revealed little, eyes forward, jaws set. Lena's tension was more visible. She shifted in her seat, fingers interlaced too tightly, breath uneven. The contrast between them drew quiet notice. The presentation of evidence began in segments. Nothing rushed, nothing skipped. Each piece was introduced with context, then placed on record. Vehicle location data appeared first, mapping movement with exactness that left little room for interpretation. The route, the stop, the duration, each element aligned with precision. Traffic camera footage followed, confirming the time the car had remained on the bridge. The images were clinical, indifferent to intent, yet decisive. The room absorbed the confirmation in silence. Daniel Hayes' statement was revisited. He described what he had seen, his words measured and consistent. No embellishment, no hesitation. The consistency carried its own force. Medical reports were read aloud next. The clinical language underscored severity without emotion. Dr. Olivia Brooks confirmed the elevated risk of premature birth. Her assessment grounded in objective findings. The effect was immediate. Jason's posture stiffened. Lena lowered her gaze. Sarah Collins asked direct questions. Her tone remained even, but the intent was unmistakable. She addressed discrepancies, inviting explanation. Jason attempted to respond, but the words failed to align. His earlier public claim surfaced, placed beside the evidence it contradicted. He offered no coherent justification. Attention turned to Lena. The route choice was examined. It was established that she had proposed the road. The details settled heavily in the room. Lena's composure fractured. Worry surfaced openly, her breath catching as the implication became clear. The atmosphere thickened. Even the air felt constrained. Jason's control faltered. He shifted, hands tightening, irritation breaking through restraint. Lena's eyes filled, but no sound followed, only tears held back by effort. Investigators summarized the findings. The act of abandonment was identified with clarity. The sequence of decisions, the absence of aid, the contradictions, together they formed a coherent narrative. The prosecution requested preventative measures. The language was procedural, but the impact was immediate. A formal detention order was issued. The words landed without ceremony. Jason was handcuffed. The sound of metal closing was sharp in the quiet room. His reaction was brief, anger flashing before settling into stunned stillness. Lena was escorted moments later, restrained with the same precision. Her tears fell then, silent and uncontested. Media captured the moment from a distance. Cameras documented faces, posture, the irreversible shift of power. The images traveled quickly beyond the walls, stripping away the last illusion of control. What Jason had once commanded dissolved. Authority gave way to process. Influence yielded to record. The collapse was complete, not through spectacle, but through accumulation. Emily Carter observed from afar, supported by medical staff. She did not speak. Her presence was quiet, resolute. She held herself still, eyes steady, refusing to soften the truth with display. The weight of survival rested in her silence. The room settled after the escorts departed. Papers were gathered, statements finalized. Nothing more was argued. The confrontation had reached its end. Justice moved forward, not with noise, but with certainty. The case transitioned into its final phase, and the door closed behind it, leaving only the hush of inevitability. The courtroom opened to public attention from the earliest hours of the morning. Every bench filled quickly, and those who arrived late stood along the walls, unwilling to miss what had drawn such focus. The atmosphere carried a low, steady tension, not loud or chaotic, but heavy with expectation. Cameras remained outside. Inside, the room belonged to the process. Emily Carter entered with medical support. A physician walked beside her, attentive but unobtrusive. Her steps were slow and measured, her posture careful. She did not look around the room. Her focus remained forward as she took her seat, the weight of the moment settling quietly around her. Sarah Collins rose when it was time to present the case. She laid out the full record with precision, moving through documentation that had been assembled methodically over weeks. Her voice was steady, her pacing deliberate, each element connected to the next, forming a structure that required no embellishment. Daniel Hayes was called to testify. He stood without hesitation and spoke plainly. His account did not change. He described what he had seen, where he had been, and how he had responded. The simplicity of his words carried strength. He finished, returned to his seat, and did not look back. Dr. Olivia Brooks followed. She explained the medical consequences in clear terms, avoiding dramatization. She described the physiological risks, the stress on the body, and the specific danger to the pregnancy. The explanation remained clinical, but the implications were unmistakable. The room listened without interruption. The prosecutor emphasized intent. The language remained careful, grounded in evidence rather than emotion. Decisions were traced. Opportunities to act were identified. Absence of assistance was placed in context. The argument rested on pattern and choice, not assumption. Jason Carter sat throughout the proceedings without visible reaction. His hands remained folded, his expression controlled. He did not shift when evidence appeared on the screen. He did not look toward Emily. The stillness suggested calculation, but it offered no defense. Lena Moore avoided eye contact with the courtroom. Her gaze stayed lowered, fixed on the table in front of her. When her name was spoken, she flinched slightly, then returned to stillness. Her silence did not erase her presence. It defined it. Evidence was presented clearly. Records, timelines, and visual confirmation were displayed in sequence. Each piece aligned, nothing contradicted. The structure held. Public statements made earlier were examined. The language was dissected. Inconsistencies were identified and placed beside verified facts. The contrast was stark. What had once been framed as explanation now appeared as exposure. The prosecutor addressed the attempt to flee. The action was presented not as panic, but as choice. The court was reminded that movement does not erase responsibility. The characterization shifted the weight of the act from reaction to escalation. The judges withdrew to deliberate. The room entered complete silence. No movement followed. Even breathing seemed restrained, as if the space itself understood the moment required stillness. When the panel returned, all attention centered forward. The decision was delivered without flourish. The language was formal, the conclusion unmistakable. Jason Carter was sentenced to 30 years of imprisonment. The term was stated clearly, without condition or reduction. There would be no suspension, no leniency applied. Lena Moore received a sentence of 20 years. The ruling addressed her role directly, neither exaggerated nor minimized. The court recognized participation and consequence with equal clarity. Emily lowered her head slightly. The movement was small, contained. There was no outward display of relief or triumph. The reaction remained private, held within the quiet space she had maintained throughout. Sarah Collins closed the file in front of her. Her grip tightened briefly before relaxing. The work was complete, the outcome confirmed. A soft exhale moved through the courtroom. The sound was collective but restrained. Justice had not arrived loudly. It had arrived definitively. Jason was escorted from his seat immediately. He did not resist. The transition from defendant to inmate occurred without pause. Lena followed shortly after, her expression unchanged, her steps slower. Daniel Hayes exited the courtroom without attention. He moved past the doors and into the open air, carrying nothing with him but the knowledge that his role had ended. Outside, coverage spread rapidly. Headlines formed, images circulated. The case reached those who had followed it from a distance, now resolved within the boundaries of law. Inside, the room emptied. Papers were gathered. Chairs returned to stillness. The machinery of the court reset for its next obligation. Emily was assisted from the room and guided back toward medical care. Her condition required continued monitoring. The pregnancy remained under close observation. The path ahead defined by caution rather than certainty. The legal chapter closed. Nothing remained pending. No appeals were announced in that moment. The record stood as delivered. Silence followed, not as absence, but as completion, marking the end of what had begun beneath a frozen bridge and now concluded within the measured calm of a courtroom. Emily Carter moved to a different place without making it a statement. There was no public announcement, no dramatic departure, no need to explain herself to anyone who had only watched from a distance. She chose a quiet town where the streets felt slower and the mornings did not carry the same sharp edge of fear. The new apartment was modest, clean, and warm. It was not meant to impress. It was meant to hold her. She began her new life with her child in simple, deliberate routines. The days were shaped by small needs and steady repetition, the kind of rhythm that rebuilt a person from the inside out. She learned the sound of her child's breathing in sleep. She learned the weight of a tiny body against her chest. She learned how silence could be gentle instead of threatening. Even with the worst behind her, her health remained a priority. She kept every follow-up appointment and accepted every precaution without pride. The medical environment around her was careful, stable, and respectful. Monitoring continued in a setting designed for safety, and she allowed herself to trust it. When she left clinics, she did not scan hallways for danger. She walked out into daylight like someone who had earned the right to feel normal again. She did not return to the past. Not in person, not in conversation, not in her mind when she could help it. She did not scroll back through old photos. She did not reread messages that carried poison. When memories tried to rise, she acknowledged them without feeding them. Some nights they still appeared in fragments, cold and sharp, but she learned to let them pass through her without taking over. Her focus narrowed to two things: her health and her future. She ate when she needed to eat. She rested when her body told her it was time. She rebuilt strength in small increments, not as a performance, but as a commitment. The mirror slowly began to reflect someone who was not only surviving, but returning. Sarah Collins remained present in the practical ways that mattered. Paperwork still existed, procedures still needed completion. Documents still required signatures and timelines. Sarah handled what she could, and guided Emily through the rest with patience, keeping legal burdens from becoming emotional weights. Their conversations were brief, purposeful, and always grounded in the same principle: protection, not punishment. One afternoon, a message arrived from Daniel Hayes. It was short, almost restrained to the point of disappearing. He asked how she was. He did not mention the case. He did not ask for thanks. He did not make the moment about himself. The simplicity of the words made Emily sit still for a long time before she replied. She wrote back with the same honesty. She told him they were safe. She told him she would not forget what he had done. That was all. Daniel did not continue the conversation. He did not try to step into her life. He respected the boundary that allowed her to heal without obligation. The distance was not cold. It was considerate. Emily carried his name in her memory the way she carried a quiet truth. He was not a symbol. He was a person who had made a choice when it mattered. She did not build fantasies around him. She simply held the fact that kindness existed, even in the place where she had nearly lost everything. Slowly, she learned to trust that fact again. Not in grand declarations, but in the way she let a neighbor hold a door open without flinching. In the way she accepted a cashier's small smile without suspecting it. In the way she allowed herself to walk outside with her child and feel the world as something neutral, not hostile. The painful memories did not disappear, but they moved farther away. They became less immediate, less able to hijack her body. Some mornings she woke and realized she had slept through the night without fear. Some evenings she noticed she had laughed, quietly, briefly, but honestly, at something ordinary. These were not miracles, they were milestones. She spent time preparing herself for motherhood in the way that mattered most, emotionally. She did not chase perfection. She built steadiness. She arranged the home around calm. She set up a small corner with blankets and soft light. She learned what comfort looked like when it was not temporary. She allowed herself to be a beginner without shame. Her days settled into stability. She kept the home clean, not obsessively, but as a way of maintaining peace. She learned the timing of naps and meals. She learned how to listen. She learned how to breathe through frustration without turning it into self-blame. The life she created was not glamorous, but it was hers. Peace returned in increments, a week with fewer nightmares, a month without panic when the phone rang, a season where the cold outside did not automatically pull her back to that bridge in her mind. The more she lived in safety, the more her body believed it. There were moments when she felt a fierce, surprising vitality inside herself. It was not the reckless strength of anger. It was the steady strength of endurance. She looked at her child and understood that this was her greatest reason to keep moving forward. Not to prove anything, not to defeat anyone, but to keep life growing where it had almost been cut short. She did not seek revenge. The thought appeared at times as a reflex, but it did not root itself. She had seen what obsession could do to a person's soul. She refused to hand her future to the same darkness that had tried to swallow her. Justice had already done its work. That was enough. So she chose to continue with determination. She built her future with her own hands, in choices that did not need witnesses. She learned to manage money carefully. She learned to plan. She learned to ask for help when necessary and to accept help without losing herself. She did not need control over others anymore. She needed control over her own life. Her emotional wounds began to heal the way physical wounds do. Slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. Some scars remained sensitive. Some triggers still existed. Yet the pain no longer defined her whole identity. She became more than what happened to her. One of the hardest lessons was forgiving herself. She stopped replaying every decision as if she could rewrite it. She stopped asking why she had trusted, why she had gone, why she had not seen what was coming. She replaced those questions with a quieter truth. She did not deserve what was done to her. None of it was her fault. Time brought a new balance. It did not erase the past, but it reorganized it. The horror became a chapter, not the entire book. The fear became a memory, not a daily condition. She noticed the change most in her own face, in the way her eyes softened when she looked at her child. Sometimes she stood by the window and let herself smile at the idea of tomorrow. The smile was not naive. It carried knowledge. It carried resilience. It carried the simple courage of someone who had returned from the edge. There were no villains in her life anymore. Their names were gone from her everyday world, reduced to paperwork and history and locked doors that would never open toward her again. She did not need to track them. She did not need to imagine them. Their absence was the cleanest form of freedom. Winter passed, as it always does. The air warmed, the snow thinned, light stayed longer in the evenings. Emily noticed the shift with a kind of reverence. It felt symbolic without being forced. The world moved on, and she moved with it. After ice, there was new light. It came in ordinary places, in grocery aisles, in quiet mornings, in the steady comfort of home. It came in the way her child gripped her finger. It came in the way she could breathe without bracing for harm. Emily stepped fully into motherhood with a calm she never would have believed possible. The story did not end with applause or spectacle. It ended with life continuing, with justice having done its part, and with humanity still present in the quiet spaces where healing begins.